Let's move on now, and I'm going to spend just maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes in the time-tested tax toolkit. So remember, I don't have time now to cover clause 24 and all the bits and pieces. I made you a gift earlier today. I said I would send you my webinar where I cover that. So you will get that on Monday or Tuesday. You'll be able to do that in detail, okay? But what I want to do for now is teach you two foundational principles, just two principles, and teach you why they will make you as a tax efficient as someone with 100 properties or 50 or 10, even if you've only got one or two. So I'm going to ask you to write down on your pad two statements I'm going to make. And these are your foundational principles, and then I'll explain why I've made those statements. We want to be tax efficient from income tax, capital gains tax, and inheritance tax, all three. So here's the two statements. The first statement I want you to write down is never ever sell my investment property. Never ever sell my investment property. The second statement I'd like you to write down. So never ever sell my investment property. The second statement, some of you will feel a bit uncomfortable with, just to warn you, but then I'll explain it. As the property goes up in value, so as the property goes up in value, increase my debt against it. Increase my debt against it. So never ever sell my investment properties, and as the property goes up in value, increase my debt against it. Some of you might be nervous with that, but I'll explain why. Okay? So let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. So let's look first of all at income tax, and remember, keep your energy high. We're into tax. But at the end of this 15 minutes, you'll decide that tax is exciting when you get it, okay? So let's look at income tax. So here's a £90,000 property, £67,500 mortgage, very similar to what we've got on here. This is making you £219 per month, okay, coming out of this property, okay? And in real simple terms, this isn't how it is, but if you're a 40% taxpayer, you pay 40% tax on it, 20% taxpayer, 20%, no taxpayer, no tax. It isn't like that, and especially not with clause 24, but just for simplicity to show the principle, okay? Now, let's assume, how many people in the room, if I asked you, and I said, you know, when you were being brought up by your parents, did your parents bring you up to teach you that debt was bad and you should pay it off and not have it, and that saving was a good thing? How many people would say that was how I was brought up? Put your hands up high and look around the room. Look around the room. Virtually every hand. Now, here's the thing. First of all, you need to thank your parents, because you wouldn't be in this room in a position to potentially invest or having an interest if they hadn't have brought you up like that. If you take just an average room of society, only about 60% of hands go up. So your parents have done a great thing. However, here's the challenge. Your parents probably, if you put your hand up, are what I'm going to call savers, not investors. A saver believes that debt is bad. An investor understands there is good debt and bad debt. So let me give you the definition to hammer this home. A bad debt is a debt you have to pay whether you use something or not. So right now today, you've spent the day with me, but if you've got a mortgage or you're paying rent, that's a bad debt, because you've had to pay for the house even though you weren't in it today. If you've got a car loan, you might not have driven the car for a week because you're on holiday, you still have to pay for the car. It's something that costs you money whether you are there or not, whatever you do. That's a bad debt. What's a good debt? Well, a good debt for me has two key salient points. The first is somebody else pays for it, not me. If I've got a debt but somebody else pays for it, not me, that's piece number one. Piece number two is it also makes me money. Somebody else is paying for it and it makes me money. How many of those would you like? Infinite amount. Infinite amount, please. Yeah? So therefore, how much good debt would you like? Infinite amount, please. Whatever you'll give me. And I'm going to explain this in more detail in a minute. Richard Branson, whatever you think of it, you know, he's definitely a successful business person. He's been quoted recently. This is one of his goals, written goals. I want to be one of the first people to die with a personal debt of £1 billion or more. Personal written goal. because he knows if he has £1 billion of good debt, what will he be making? Just a crazy amount of money. Okay, now I'm not saying get to $1 billion, you don't need to. Okay, but you want to get this. Now, so let's assume, now we get that principle. Let's assume I take two people. So I've got Ajit. So Ajit and Kia. Kia? Both of them. Kia. So Ajit and Kia. So apologies if I got it wrong. So Ajit and Kia, I've taught them this stuff. Kia says, I get what you're teaching me, Aaron, but I just can't help it. I was so brought up by my family to pay my debts down. I just have to pay this debt off. Even though you're telling me not to, I've got to pay it off. So let's look at what happens. So over the next 10, 15 years, Kia works really hard. Let's assume they've got identical jobs. They've got identical semi-detached properties that are next door to each other, identical incomes for the next 15 years. Everything's identical, okay? The only difference is Kia takes $67,500 of his hard-earned money and he uses it over the 15 years to pay this mortgage to zero, whereas Ajit, who's on my mentorship program, goes, I learnt better than that from Aaron, I'm not going to pay it down, okay? So what's the reward that Kia gets in 10 or 15 years' time? Well, let's have a look. So if we fast forward this, 10, 15 years, he's paid the mortgage to zero. So there's an extra £250 a month dropping onto the bottom line, extra income. So the government come along and they say, hey, you two have the same jobs, you have the same properties, you've got the same amount of money coming in, but Kia, because you've paid your debt down, here's the reward, I'll tax you an extra £100 a month, congratulations. He has to pay, everything's identical, he has to pay an extra £1,200 a year because he paid the mortgage down. Would you ever pay the mortgage down to pay more tax? Okay, so first rule, it doesn't link back to the principles yet, but we're not going to pay them down. We're going to take interest-only mortgages. If you've got a repayment mortgage, you're paying it down. Okay? Now, by the way, while Kia was busy doing that, Ajit would have taken his £67,500, the same money, and had a lot of parties and invited us all, or would have bought, more wisely, more investment properties. So now he's got 4 going up in value instead of Kia only having 1. Another reason not to pay it down. It slows you down your future growth. Okay? Does this make sense? Raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Great. Okay. So let's go back to Ajit though. So Ajit doesn't pay the mortgage down. Okay? He keeps the property with the mortgage the same. The trouble he's got, it's not a trouble, but the rent is going up every year. By the way, you should always put your rents up every single year, 3 to 5% a year. Every year without fail. Okay, I've done it for 20 years. Somebody does not move out for the sake of £30 a month. If they do, it was coincidence, they were moving out anyway. So you have to put your rents up every year. None of this, oh, but I like them and they don't give me any hassle, so I'll give them it cheap. Okay, my response to that is always, okay, so you love them more than your own kids because you're giving it them cheap instead of giving the money to your kids. Okay, always 3 to 5% per annum. Okay, so for Ajit, 650's become 670, become 690. 3 years in, he's got rent of 710. His problem is that's going to put an extra £60 a month on the bottom line. He's going to have to pay more tax. Now, over the next 3 years, there'll have been some inflation. So the maintenance might have gone up with inflation. Let's say that's gone up from £80 to £90. The other thing that will have gone up with inflation is the value of the house. So Ajit goes back to the bank. He says, hey, bank, the house is worth a bit more money now. Can I please borrow 75% of the new value? The bank goes, of course you can. Yeah, you've been putting your rents up, so that helps you pay for the increased mortgage cost. You can borrow a bit more, but you'll have to pay more on the mortgage. Ajit goes, that's fine. The increased rent will pay for it. So let's, for easy numbers for me, let's assume the mortgage goes up to £300 a month. So Ajit now has an extra £60 a month coming in, but he's got an extra £60 a month going out. His net income remains the same. His income tax remains the same, even though he put the rents up. Does that make sense, yes or no? Yes. Okay, so if you follow that second principle, as the property goes up in value, increase your debt against it, you stay income tax efficient. Okay, more on this in a moment. Okay, let's look, and I know, by the way, some of you are going, Clause 24 doesn't work exactly like that. Or some of you in your heads are going, you're getting to the complex stuff, the detailed ones of you going, well, once you've borrowed past the value of the house, it's been... I'm giving you a principle for now. But the principle holds true with Clause 24, it holds true with everything else you'll see on the video. Okay, it makes sense. This is how you do it. Look at the next piece, capital gains. So we buy a house for £100,000. On average, they double every 8 years in the UK, but let's say it takes 15 years to double. 15 years from now, it's worth £200,000. Okay? 15 years after that, it's worth £400,000. Let's assume we then sell the house. Okay, we sell the house. I'll go back to these guys and reverse the roles. So Keir doesn't sell his house, but Ajit does. Get some revenge on him, Keir. Okay, so he sells his house. The government come along and say, well, you've got to pay capital gains tax. You're a 40% taxpayer, so it's 28% tax, £84,000 tax bill. By the way, if you're a 20% taxpayer, which you won't be by then, but it's only it's still 54,000 tax bill. So he sells for 400, he pays the tax bill, he pays the estate agents and solicitors, he's left with about £300,000. Keir says, hang on a minute, Aaron told me never to sell. Rule number 1, principle 1. What do? Okay, I refinance it and borrow 75% of what it's worth. So if I borrow 75% of the 400, that's 300. So Keir ends up borrowing 300. He has 300,000 in the bank, the same as Ajit did. What's the difference? The difference is that Keir still owns the house. Ajit's lost it. So they both got the 300,000, but Keir still owns it. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so what's going to happen? This is not a trick question. Keir still owns it. He owns it for another 15 years. They double every 15 years. If it's 400,000 now, what will it be worth when they've doubled again? 800,000. And whether Keir is here or not, I hope he is, but another 15 years after that, that £800,000 house, him or his family will own it. What will it be worth? 1.6 million. So because Ajit sold the house, him and his family have just missed out on £1.2 million worth of growth. Never ever sell your investment property. Never sell your investment property. I'm literally telling you to take these properties to the grave with you. Die owning them. Die owning them. I meet all these people in their 60s and their 70s and they're busy selling off their properties to sort things out and paying massive capital gains tax bills, and it drives me crazy. I'm like, you need to die first. Die first. Now, I don't mean die earlier. Just die when you were planning to die and let the properties be sold later. There's something called, you can Google this later, capital gains tax washout. Capital gains tax washout. What this is, if this property, say I pass away, I won't do it to you now, AJ, I pass away, and I've got a house that's worth 800,000 that I bought for 100. So me and my family have made a £700,000 gain by this time. And I pass away. On my death, the capital gains tax gets written off. Written off, no one has to pay it. I'm going to come on to inheritance tax, but it's written off. If I'd have sold it the day before, I'd have paid 28% tax on 700,000, a couple of £100,000 in tax. If I die first, no capital gains tax to pay. So why would you ever pay capital gains? It's crazy. Okay? The only caveat to this is if you've bought dross in the past before you had my teaching. If you didn't buy to the rules, sometimes people come up to the end and go, I'm totally confused because I've bought a rubbish property, it's not performing, and now you're telling me not to sell it. If you want help with that, let my team have a copy of your portfolio. We'll have a look at it, and then I'll give you some feed forward on what I would do in that. Sometimes they're just worth keeping because of the tax. Other times they are so bad you need to get rid and just start again. Okay? So, but if you buy to the rules and then follow this tax advice, you never sell. Okay, if that makes sense, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Okay, let's look next at inheritance tax. Okay, inheritance tax. Now, when you pass away, the first 325,000 that you pass on goes tax-free. If you're in a couple, on the second person dying, 650,000 can go tax-free. Okay? I'm going to assume for simplicity that your own residential house and its equity and your cars and your stocks, the other stuff you've got uses up your allowance, just to make it simple. Okay? So we can compare apples with apples. So let's assume that's happened. And let's go back to the earlier scenario where Keir had paid off his mortgages, and so he spent the last 20 or 30 years being taxed a load of extra income tax. But what else happens to him now? Here's what happens. He's got £1 million portfolio when he passes away, but no debt on it. So the government come along, they say, Keir, or Keir's kids, whoever inherits it, you've got a 40% tax bill on this, and you need to pay that £400,000 in the next 12 months roughly. Now, unless Keir's a genius, he didn't predict when he was going to die. So let's say he dies in a flat market or a falling market. So now the kids have got a year to sell some of this stuff to pay the tax bill. They end up selling to somebody like me that offers them 15 or 20% less than it's worth. He's worked his whole life to build this portfolio to give to his kids. They sell it for 800,000, pay the bill, they end up with about less than 500,000. Less than 500,000, than half of it. If we go back to Ajit's example though, because he didn't pay the mortgages down, so he's income tax efficient, he's got £1 million portfolio, he's got 750,000 of debt on it. Remember, this isn't a problem for him because it's good debt. Somebody else is paying for it and it's making him money. They're making him £200 a month. If he's got 9 of these, that's 1,800 a year, 800 a month, 25 grand a year. He's happy as roses. When he passes away, the 40% tax is charged on only the equity. So 40% of 250, the bill is only 100,000, not 400,000. I know which bill I would write to my kids or have if I was the kid. Yeah? This stuff is amazing, isn't it? This guy's in hysterics down here. He's gone. It's gone. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. By the way, my mentorship students, I'll show you how to make that about £10,000. Can't do that now. It takes longer. But you don't want to be paying that either. Okay? Does this make sense so far? Yes or no? Yes. So from the two principles, we're now income tax efficient, capital gains tax efficient, and inheritance tax efficient. However, we're now really tax efficient. Where's the profit? Some of you will be thinking that, because we're going to need a lot of houses at £219 a month to be able to retire comfortably, aren't we? So let me show you where the profit is. How do professionals take their profits from property? And you can do the same with just 1 or 2 properties. Here's how it works. So let's imagine you've got a £100,000 property, 75,000 mortgage, 25,000 equity in the house. Okay? The market goes up 20%. So your £100,000 property becomes worth £120,000. Okay? And let's assume you go back to the bank, you go, hey, like Ajit did, hey, the house has gone up in value. Can I please borrow 75% of the new value? I've increased my rents to pay for the cost. The bank go, of course you can. He has to pay his old mortgage off of 75,000 and he gets left with £15,000 that the bank puts in his current account. Okay. Now there's 3 things I want you to notice on this page. The first is, even though he's borrowed more money, his equity is still higher than it was to start with, and it continues to do that throughout the years. The second thing that really excites me is something called the compound effect. Okay? So next time when it goes up 20%, it's not 20% of 100, it's 20% of 120. So it goes up 24,000 next time, he can release 18,000. The time after, he can release 21,600. This release is inflation proofed. More on that in a minute. Final piece. What is really beautiful about this is that money that gets released, because it's money you've borrowed, it is no tax to pay. It's not an income. It's money you've borrowed. It's tax-free. I can't see you smiling. This is amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. So, let's imagine you set off, Ajit buys this house, and he buys a second. So he starts with 2. Starts with 2. They go 20%. He releases 15 from this one, 15 from this one. He's got 30. Guess what he does with his 30? Tax-free. He buys a third. Another house. Now he's got 3 going up. They need to go up about 13%. He can release money and buy a 4th. 4 going up, need to go up about 10%. He releases, buys a 5th. 5 going up 8%, buys a 6th. 6 going up 7%, buys a 7th. 7 going up 6%, buys an 8th. It gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Yeah? Start now. Start now, not later. The sooner you start, the sooner you get here, and it's just crazy. It's just going really fast. You just have to get started with this. Whether you do it with me, do it yourself, just get going. Okay? You'll get this even more in a while. You can see I'm passionate about this, eh? So let's imagine Ajit does this, and he builds his portfolio. And do you remember earlier on I said, let's be cautious. Let's just assume 5% per annum growth, not 7.9. So 10 years from now, we meet Ajit. And Agit's properties have gone up 5% a year, even without compounding. They're worth about 150 each. By the way, just starting with 2, he would have 9 by then. 9. So we meet Agit 10 years from now. He started with 2, but he's got to 9. Okay? And he's got £1.4 million. 9 properties worth 150 each, 1.4 million. He's got £1 million of mortgages, but this is good debt. The tenants are paying for it, and his properties are making him £200 a month each, £25,000 a year. And he's got 350,000 equity. Now, I meet Agit, I say, Agit, how's it going? He says, I'm delighted with where it is, but I've got to tell you, Aaron, 9's enough for me. You know, I wanted to get some great properties, but 9's enough. I go, that's cool. So a year later, the property market has gone up, and it's gone up another 5%, to be cautious, okay? So the property market's gone up 5%, and I meet Agit again. I say, Agit, great news. Your property worth 1.4 is now worth 1.47. It's gone up 70,000 in value. You could release money and buy some more properties. Now Agit says, that's great, Aaron, but you're forgetting I told you 9 was enough. I don't want any more than 9. That's enough. So then my response to that is, great, no problem. Still release the money, just like you have done for the last 10 years to grow the portfolio, but instead, now release the money and spend it on a holiday. Spend it on a car. Quit your job and live off it. 50,000 tax-free is like 70,000 today before tax. Now the beauty is inflation means, because it's a compound effect, next year he can release 55,000, the year after 58,000. He's on 52,000 a year for the rest of his life, inflation-proofed. Who would like that, by show of hands? Yeah? And he's paying no tax on it. Not a penny. It's crazy. Okay, you are smiling now, which is good. Which is good. Now, a couple of things. The property market doesn't go up at 5% a year steady like that. We get peaks and troughs like we talked about earlier. So when it goes up 10%, Agit has to be clever. He has to say, do you know what? I've been able to release 105,000 all in 1 year, but I budgeted on 52. So I'll spend the 52, and the other 52 I'll put in the contingency pot. And he has 4 or 5 years of double-digit growth like London's just had, and he should be building the contingency pot. Then the market might go flat for 5 years. 0% growth or even a bit of a drop. He can't release anything, but he lives off the extra money he banked before. So this is an averaging process. If on average it goes up at 5% a year, that is on average what Agit will be able to release. Does that make sense, yes or no? Yeah? Now, you might say, you know, down on the front row, so Roma might say to me, Aaron, this sounds amazing, but I only need 30,000 tax-free, but I've got to say I'm more cautious than you. I only believe in 4%. So I'd rather model at 4%. I say, that's fine, Roma. So 30,000 tax-free at 4%, you'd need 40,000 of growth. At 4%, that means Roma needs £1 million portfolio to retire. She now knows exactly what size she needs. Yeah? Christine says, do you know what? 30,000, are you kidding me? I need 60,000 a year. I fly all over the world, I need my money. So Christine wants 60,000, but she also says, I agree with Roma, I want to be cautious, 4%. So now we know 60,000 tax-free means 80,000 here at 4%. So Christine now needs a £2 million portfolio. She knows exactly what she needs. You just, once you get this, you can just plug your own numbers into it, and hey presto, you've got your vision. You're tax efficient, but you know where you need to get to in terms of portfolio size when you're finished. Does this make sense, yes or no? Yes. Yeah? So we're being tax efficient right across the piece by never ever selling our investment property. As it goes up in value, we increase our debt against it, and you can use this strategy with 1, 2, or multiple properties. Okay.